Hello, I'm Locke Meredith. I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where my guest is Henry Patrick. He's a cardiologist here in Baton Rouge, 27 years to get there, folks. He's going to talk to us about the effect that he believes the closing of the Baton Rouge General Mid-City is going to have on Baton Rouge and the other surrounding hospitals. He's also going to talk about the effect that government has when it gets its paws on the practice of medicine and how it forces doctors to focus on paperwork instead of you. So join us on the next Legal Lines with Henry Patrick. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where we're going to talk about the law and you and why it should matter to you what a law is. You know, in America, in our cities, in our states, in our federal governments, they all pass thousands, hundreds of thousands of laws, regulations every single year, and they either directly or indirectly affect you. That's why you need to know what a law is. It's an exercise of power over people, places, and things. So join us on the next Legal Lines, where knowledge is power. Hello, welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and I'm very pleased to have on the show today for the first time Dr. Henry Patrick. Henry, it is great to see you.
Good to see you, Locke.
Henry and I went to high school together, and he's a cardiologist here in town, and so we're going to talk about the heart. We're going to talk about the government and laws now in the practice of medicine. Henry, kind of tell folks a little bit about yourself, first of all. I mean, we were talking about it earlier, 27 years of education.
I guess I'd have to add it up, but it's a long time. You have to go to school, high school, college, med school 4 years, and then depending on your level of specialization, you have residencies and fellowships.
And you're a cardiologist, so you have certifications and other...
Right, so I'm boarded in cardiology and boarded in electrophysiology.
Which means what, to be boarded?
That's
for
a
folks?
heart electrician. So you got, the general cardiologist is a plumber. You know, they take care of the stents and balloon angioplasty, so the plumbing system of the heart, and then there's also an electrical system of the heart, and I more specialize in that. So a lot of what I do, personally what I do is I take care of other cardiologists' patients with a little niche practice of electrophysiology.
And so when you say you're board certified, that means you had to study and take a test and then be approved as qualified. It's not something that's easily accomplished.
No, and we do it every 10 years. So I do that, go through that process.
You're continuing
in 93, 94, then 03 and 04, and then recently, so we're glad to have got that out of our way for another 10 years.
Baton Rouge born and raised, got family
Grew up in
here.
Tiger Stadium, yeah. Grew up in Tiger Stadium.
Lehigh boy.
Went to Magnolia Woods, Kenilworth, and Lee, and had a great career here. The schooling system was, it was right at the flux of when busing was starting,
right.
and you and I just missed that. Thank goodness, I think, and you know, I found, and I'm sure you found, that you could really get out of public schools anything you wanted back then. And,
you could, and I would hope that still exists, but there's certainly concerns today. But hopefully, society will begin to address it. Went
to LSU undergrad. Was a chemical engineer student. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so I did chemical engineering and took pre-med electives, I guess.
Now you're on the staff, or not the staff, but you have privileges at multiple hospitals here in Baton Rouge. Explain to the folks.
Yeah, so you know, the private practice typically goes to whatever hospitals the patients are at, and you know, we refer patients to hospitals, and patients that show up at hospitals that we take care of, we go to see them there. So we do most of our work at the 2 Baton Rouge Generals and then at the Lady of the Lake. Okay, and you said the 2 Baton Rouge Generals, but as of today at 7 a.m., as I understand it, the emergency room at Baton Rouge General Mid-City no longer exists. Yeah, that's going to be quite a flux. I happened to be there this morning, right about that time, and so it's going to be very unusual for the emergency room to be closed. And it affects us because some of what we do is truly an emergency. A lot of what we do is not, but some is really an emergency.
Meaning they're going to die. Something screwed up with their heart, they could possibly die.
They could die, but you know, the theory now of how to interrupt a heart attack is to get them to the cath lab as quick as possible and reestablish the blood flow to the artery that's blocked. And so the sooner you do that, the less muscle that gets damaged, and the less muscle gets damaged, the overall function of the heart is as good as it's going to be, and their survival is better. So it's all good things.
Well, explain to me what your appreciation of the need for an emergency room in that part of town, that whether or not that need exists. Because as I understand it, a lot of the folks that are cared for at Mid-City were folks who were not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, and they were very used to going there.
Yeah, well, you know, Baton Rouge is fairly localized, and the northern Baton Rouge has income issues and all sorts of issues, and southern Baton Rouge is a little more affluent. And the hospitals are sort of relocating to the more affluent areas, and with the closure of Earl K. Long, which was really a bad structural place.
Meaning the building was falling apart.
The building was falling apart when I did a rotation there in 1980.
And it was falling apart back then.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It was falling apart then, and so they really Velcroed and superglued it together for another 25 years or so, and now it closed. And then those people would go to Baton Rouge General downtown because it's closer, and a lot of emergencies you want the closest place. As a matter of fact, EMS has to take you to the closest place if they think it's a real, true to life and death emergency. They're required to take you to the closest place, even against your objections. And so those people would come to the Baton Rouge downtown, but
it's gone. That option's gone now, right?
That option's gone, and the Baton Rouge General was sort of at I think they were at a disadvantage after the big privatization, Key, because the Lady of the Lake, which is a great hospital, and I do most of my work at the lake actually, they worked out a contract with the state, and so they became the teaching institution
for LSU.
For LSU, and as that they've become the new Earl K. Long as far as the uninsured or underinsured patient needs to go there. But as people do what people do, and people do what they did last week, and so those people that would go to the downtown general, they frequently still went to the downtown general. And then the downtown general is caring for people that not only were uninsured or underinsured, but they no longer got state money for doing that. And so I think
so
it just
ran out of money.
I think folks it just led to a losing proposition for them.
Okay, so the problem was the folks who were receiving the care didn't have the money to pay for the services provided.
Right.
And as a result, the hospital wasn't getting money from the state or the federal government because Our Lady of the Lake had been chosen to provide that type of service that would be compensated. And so they couldn't keep the lights on, so to speak.
And whether that would have happened anyway, I don't know, because the mix, what's called the payer mix, you know, what percentage of people have insurance, and of those insurance, what percentage of people have insurance that pay more than other insurances say. The payer mix may be altered, and so that downtown general may have gone down with the emergency room anyway. The hospital's still open. What it means is that people who get admitted there will have to come through a direct admission from their doctor's office.
So the practical consequence of the ER room at Baton Rouge General downtown shutting down is if they go there, there's nobody there to provide the emergency room care.
Right.
So they either go to another hospital, or if they arrive at a doctor's office, that's not an option available. They've got to go to Our Lady of the Lake, period?
No, they can go to a doctor's office, and the doctor who admits their patients to the general will still be able to do so.
Okay.
And then I suspect, and I think what they're trying to do is to expand the use of urgent care type centers. And as you may know, I certainly know that a lot of people use urgent care when they're not really in the fix of a true emergency, just because they don't have to wait 4 hours to be seen.
Right. And so the concern, I believe, that I've seen expressed is that because downtown Baton Rouge General has been shut down, now those delays that you mentioned are going to increase, and perhaps the quality of care suffer at Our Lady of the Lake. Is that a legitimate concern?
I think it's a concern. We just don't know how it's going to play out.
And so the bottom line is we need to see what happens and let the dust settle.
Oh, I think so, yeah.
How long will that take, Henry?
I think it's going to take months.
You mentioned when we were talking earlier that folks need to be retrained, because a lot of folks go to the Baton Rouge General or any of the ER emergency rooms for care that really is an emergency.
Oh, they have a fever and they go to the emergency room. You know, they're tooth hurts, they go to the emergency room. People
So that should be part of the scenario.
Yeah,
All right, we'll continue this on the next segment.
Okay.
This is Locke Meredith Legal Lines, cardiologist Henry Patrick. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where we're going to talk about you and the law. You know, a law is nothing but an exercise of power over you, people, places, or things. But where does that power come from? Where does the government get that power? And how is that power exercised? And do you play a role at all? That's what you need to know. So join us on the next Legal Lines, where knowledge is power. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, very pleased to have on the show for the very first time Henry Patrick. He's a cardiologist here in Baton Rouge, tons of education, and we're talking about the closing of Mid-City, Baton Rouge General, but now we're shifting gears and we're going to talk about kind of the way that the government has become much more involved in the practice of medicine and how just the practice of medicine is changing. Henry, tell folks kind of what you've seen over these last 20 plus decades.
Well, thank goodness it's not been 20 plus decades.
2 plus decades, yeah.
So the government's definitely very involved. They've been involved for many years with the Medicare and the codes and all that. But some years ago, there's a big shift into worry that all physicians needed to be owned, or practices needed to be owned by hospitals. So a lot of physicians sold out to hospitals, which is a good thing in some respects and not as good in other respects. And so there's a hospital-based model and a pure private practice-based model. And within the hospital, you may notice if you go to the hospital, or you've had friends at the hospital or visit, it's changed from back in the day when your primary care physician, your internist or family practice doctor, you've been seeing for years. If you got sick and had to go to the hospital, they would take care of you.
Right.
Well,
that doesn't happen anymore.
It no longer happens. I really can't think of a primary care physician. There are a few that still care for their patients in the hospital, but really just a handful. There's a whole new specialist called a hospitalist. And they're great because they are trained internal medicine doctors typically, and they're very knowledgeable, and they're used to taking care of sick people.
In the hospital? In
the hospital. The only caveat is that when you're there, they don't know you, and so it's
probably never seen you before.
No, you're seeing it. So it's you're seeing a new person for the first time, and you're having to go through the history and all the past history, and if there's any complications with medications. And sometimes people in the hospital don't really necessarily provide the best data because they're sick. But that's the model we're in, and it just takes a while for people who don't go to the hospital and they're anticipating their doctor to see them. They never get to see their doctor.
But Henry, and I'm speaking from personal experience, I had 2 loved ones pass away recently in the hospital system. And my observation was that you are dealing with a person there who does not know anything about the medical history of the patient sitting in the bed. And there doesn't seem to be a very coordinated, efficient, effective way of communicating with the folks who do have all that vast knowledge, who've seen them for years. How do we fix that?
Yeah, I think I think that's one of the theories of the electronic health record, and in another generation.
Explain to folks what that is.
Well, that's just where all of your data is on an electronic computer base.
And this was a law passed in the last couple of years by the federal government that says.
Yeah, and it's probably good. We personally are not EHR yet. My own clinic. And there's a lot of reasons, the pros and a lot of reasons of the cons. Ultimately, the government has a carrot and stick model, so they would provide you with incentives to do it early, and then they come back with disincentives if you haven't done it.
Meaning money, I guess.
Meaning money. But the theory is that your hospital records and your private clinic records will all be available in some database that can be shared
to any doctor or healthcare provider.
Yes, and the functionality is that your computer, even though it may operate on the same system as somebody else's, it may not necessarily share that data seamlessly, and so that will probably all get worked out one day, but right now it's not. Now, that has really nothing to do with the federal the federal Obamacare and all that. That's kind of just a
that was
process.
A previous law in the last couple of years.
That's just
there was great privacy concerns expressed back then when the law was considered. That
well, there's
somehow,
still that.
Right,
Yeah,
someone's going to get access to all that, and you know we're seeing computers and governmental computers getting hacked.
Yeah,
all
but
the time.
that ship's gone, and it's
done.
Yeah, that's going to be that way. Now, the primary care physicians right now are not going to the hospitals, but your specialists still do. So almost all of the specialists still have hospital rounds, and so we, for instance, still see our patients that are in the hospital if they have a cardiac issue and they need a cardiologist. The hospitalist or their internist or their pulmonologist or the ICU team will call.
And consult with the treating physicians.
Right, or in the emergency room situation, we will be involved from the get-go if they have unstable angina or in the throes of a heart attack or having some sort of arrhythmia.
Henry, you were talking about that there was the kind of the private office model for doctors, physician, healthcare providers, and then the hospital model, where the hospital basically makes the doctor their employee, pays them a set salary, I guess, and the doctor doesn't have the headaches of overhead and administrative tasks. What flaws do you see in that? Is there any problem with that model? Y'all aren't part of that model, right?
No, there's certainly safety in that you have this big, huge umbrella of a hospital to support you. And as far as lobbying goes, the hospital lobby is much more powerful than the physician lobbies. And I guess the issue then is that those people that really want to be their own boss, they're technically not their own boss anymore. Right. They're sort of their own boss, but they're not really their own boss. And then there's the payment issue as far as the way the hospitals are able to do this is the government has incented them to do this, because if you go to have a procedure in an ambulatory outpatient private clinic setting, it may cost X dollars.
More?
Well, say $100. And if you do it at a hospital setting from a hospital-based person, it may cost $150 that the insurance is paying, Medicare is paying. And so the hospital can use the $150, give you $105.
Interesting.
And pocket the rest. And so
but the government's paying more.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, is whether the government is actually going to be paying more for health care. And so we don't really know how that's going to turn out over time.
Well, let's talk about the quandary that doctors, whether they've got the private practice model or the hospital model, faces. The bottom line is, it seems to me in the big analysis, you guys have become forced to become the employees of either the private insurers, which are now part of Obamacare, or Medicaid or Medicare, because the vast majority of your payments come via insurers or the Obamacare Medicare scenario, right? And they tell you what you get.
Well, the government you don't negotiate with, because they're bureaucracies that determine what you get. Insurers,
private
insurers you negotiate with. And it's usually based on some degree of percentage, positive or negative, from what Medicare says. And then there's but with all services, with your services, you want some documentation of a service you've provided to generate a fee. And so a lot of this stuff is documentation of what you've done. And then, nowadays we've almost into the cookbook medicine, and that's one of the problems of the computer ages, that you can't, it is wanted and desired that you do what's called best practice. And these are all noble things, and I'm all for it. Best practice implies that if you have 100 people, you should treat them all the same. So if you have, in my case, 100 people with heart dysfunction, prior heart attack, and their heart's weak, they should all be on a beta blocker. They all should all be on an ACE inhibitor. If their heart function's reduced to a certain number, that you should consider putting an implantable defibrillator in them. And all that's fine, but it's a checkbox. Oh, and you got to be on a statin, and you got to be on an aspirin. So it's all these check boxes you got to do. And you get in trouble if you don't do all the check boxes.
All right, well, we'll continue this on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith Legal Lines, cardiologist Henry Patrick. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where we're talking about the law and you. The law is nothing but an exercise of power by a government over you. But because our framers in our Constitution knew that power could be abused and corrupting, they chopped up power between the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judiciary, and you. So join us on the next Legal Lines, where knowledge is power. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, very pleased to have on the show my friend Henry Patrick. He's a cardiologist here in Baton Rouge. Henry, we were talking about kind of the requirements that the government or the insurance companies kind of make you go through to how much they tell you how much you're going to get paid and what you got to do to get paid. And I know that you brought up coding and how you have to kind of go through this checkbox process. Explain to the folks what coding is.
Oh God. So, you know, when you see a person, there's a code for what level of office visit. If you pat them on the head and say hello, that's a code. If you have an extensive history and physical and they're very sick and you have to go through a lot of different issues with them, then that's a separate code that would reimburse you more money. If you do any kind of procedures, there's a code. There's a code for everything. So
it's a way of documenting the reason why you should get paid what you've asked submitted for.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and also documenting what the patient's conditions are so that that can be tracked too.
And so, as I understand it, currently just for your type of practice, you have around 14,000 codes, but it's about to increase to 70,000?
Well, for all practices, 14,000, but it's going to increase to 70. Cardiology has a large amount of those codes, and so there's going to be a code for if your coronary disease is in the first part of the artery, the middle part of the artery, the distal part of the artery. There's a code for everything. And the trick will be, the trick is going to be is that in October these codes are supposed to change. They're supposed to augment to what's called ICD-10. It's a standard of coding. And the hope is that we physicians will be able to look over some massive drop-down list of codes and pick the right code that fits to that person's actual problem, and then submit it. And then it gets to an insurance company, and the insurance company, be it Medicare or Blue Cross or whomever, they have a computer system that actually doesn't have a glitch, and that all matches up, and then you can get reimbursed
timely,
weeks later instead of months later. And so there may be cash flow issues coming. And
so 2 issues is improper code being used, because you guys got to learn a whole new set of codes, more specific codes, and then it not some glitch resulting or not being the proper code in somebody else's opinion, and you don't get paid time.
And this happens every several years, and then something changes and it goes through this process.
It's amazing. All right.
And that's why you hear a lot of grumping about the physicians who are grumping, because what is also true about that has nothing to do with the practice of medicine. And that's the fun part. And so dealing with the little tenuous
administrative paperwork.
Yeah, that drives people crazy.
It's sucking the life out of a doctor.
Yeah, but doctoring's fun.
Well, let's talk about doctoring. You
brought
some of the tools of your trade here.
I'm so happy to do. Look, I can't tell you how happy I am to do what I do.
Let's talk about. First of all, you got the heart model.
Got a heart. This is
explain to the folks kind of the purpose of the model. What you're going to show us with it.
Well, this is actually a model for EP, but it has veins and arteries. The red guys are arteries, and this is the famous left anterior descending, and if the blockage is way high when it first comes off the aorta, it comes off the aorta and branches into one that goes behind the heart, and this one, they call that the famous Widowmaker.
Okay.
Not one of the top 10 things you want to have. So the heart inside has valves, and this is a mitral valve over here, and the tricuspid valve here, and those separate the 2 ventricles from the 2 atria. This is where the God-given pacemaker starts, and as you sleep, the heart rate goes down, and when you exercise, the heart rate goes up, and then it transmits through the upper 2 chambers, and then there's an electrical bridge in the middle part of the heart, which you can't see, and then that transmits to the bottom chambers to tell the heart to squeeze. And so there's an electrical impulse that generates the mechanical motion of a heartbeat.
And do you have one of those devices here?
Well, so when the electrical system gets screwed up, we start talking about pacemakers and implantable defibrillators or ICDs. And I just brought a couple models from, this is what I was putting in people in the mid-90s. And you can see it's pretty big. And there was one, the predecessor to this was even bigger. It was truly almost my entire hand. And these were so big they'd have to go into the abdominal region. And then in about 1996, they developed them small enough as computer technology got better that they now are implanted in the pectoral region. And so this is a current kind of generation defibrillator. I tell people it's 3 fingers big. And it's connected to a lead which goes in through the vein under the collarbone here. This vein travels through. And so once you start the IV and the lead advances through the vein, then the lead will come, let's see if it will go. I haven't actually played with this particular one. Yeah, well,
so
and the lead will come into the heart, through the vein as a conduit into the vein. And this is a defibrillator, and this will sit in the right ventricle. And this has a coil on it, and that coil allows a large amount of energy to be transmitted between it and where the defibrillator sits in the chest. And it's like encompassing the heart, and that delivers a big shock to reboot the heart if you go into a life-ending rhythm, like you see in the emergency room shows where they bring people in.
And they're shocking them.
They're yelling clear and shocking them. These type of devices do it within 10 or 15 seconds automatically.
So this is like having your own personal paddle set inside your body.
I tell people every day, this is your own personal paramedic. You know, you don't ever want to use it, but if you need it, you want it there.
Now, does that device send signals out to a computer or anything like that?
Actually, they do now, yeah. So there's a home monitoring system. It's a little box. It's hooked up either to a wireless system or to a telephone line. And then that goes to a server, and then that gets downloaded to our clinic. And we can tell if people had arrhythmias, what they got shocked for, if the battery's getting weak. It is
remarkable.
Great stuff.
Remarkable. What other toys do you have over here?
Just comparable size. This is a pacemaker. This is a defibrillator. So pacemakers are much, much smaller.
And the purpose of the pacemaker is different from the defibrillator how?
So defibrillators have pacemakers in them, but pacemakers don't have defibrillators in them.
Okay.
So defibrillators can pace. Technically, their main job is to shock if they have to.
So if the heart shuts down or it's freaking out and can't pump,
exactly,
gets paddled.
So a pacemaker, what it does is it provides a small electrical stimulus that you can't feel every so often. So if a heartbeat of 60 is 1 heartbeat a second. So if you haven't had your own heartbeat in that second, it gives a little stimulus to trigger a heartbeat.
Fascinating. So you set the parameters that the pacemaker follows?
Yeah, so they're all programmable with computers, and there's multiple different companies that make these, and each one has their own computer.
Now where's this one inserted in the body?
They're inserted
same region.
It's just much smaller, and the lead, this defibrillator lead, the pacemaker lead is smaller.
And what is the lifetime of these things?
It depends. So a typical lifetime of a defibrillator is in the 7-ish year range. Unless it's a heart failure defibrillator, then it's in the 5-year range. Pacemakers are typically about 10 years these days. I have some that are 12 to 14 years, others that are in the 8 to 10 year range.
Fascinating.
And this is cool stuff. So people that black out for unexplained reasons, and you do all this workup and you can't figure out why they black out, this is a implantable under the skin loop recorder. It's really like Star Trek stuff, a little bit.
Fascinating. We got
and this has been replaced. This has been replaced by this little gizmo. It's like 2 matchsticks, and so this is literally a 5-second surgery. We nick the skin by the chest. There's an injector, and we inject it in. This lasts 3 years, and it's hooked to a wireless system that when your heart goes too slow or too fast, which we program, it will automatically transmit that up to the internet, down to us, and we can find out the cause of people's blackout, which frequently is that their heart slows down dramatically or stops for 5 or 10 seconds, and they need a pacemaker.
And so these devices are getting smaller and more efficient and effective as time's going on. So I assume
they're getting more and more wireless in that we can follow these people up.
Fantastic. Henry, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. This is Locke Meredith of Legal Lines and my guest Henry Patrick, Baton Rouge cardiologist. Thanks for being with us.